before oil was discovered in Equatorial Guinea, but Obiang was still there as the dictator back then. Could you talk about your experiences and how you've seen the country evolve once oil was discovered there?
Yeah, good morning. Happy to do that. Yeah, there was no oil, and Obiang, while he certainly was not saintly at that time, there were some instances of torture and things like that. We have to write up an annual human rights report, and there were some abuses there. But once the oil came in, he changed completely. I mean, the whole regime changed completely. It was always a kleptocracy, but there was a lot more to steal once the oil was there. So it degenerated very quickly with the arrival of oil and with the greater opportunities.
Can you talk about the role of the oil companies, Ambassador Ruddy? The companies like Chevron, the companies like ExxonMobil, and the role they've played in shoring up Obiang?
Well, first of all, let me just mention to you that I used to be counsel for Exxon before I went to Washington in the 80s. I just want to make that clear. But the companies themselves are looking for oil there as they're looking for oil every place else. They're looking for a stable regime so that they can do their business. And just how much they've had to do with carrying out some of these terrible policies of Obiang, I frankly don't know. Generally, I can speak, well, I can't speak for Exxon, but I can say that Exxon is not the kind of company that would willingly engage in these kinds of things, but they may have been manipulated. How much or at all, I simply can't say because I don't know that.
Well, Ambassador, there's been a lot of attention, obviously, in recent years to the situation in Zimbabwe and the legitimate criticism of what is going on in terms of President Mugabe. Yet, as we mentioned earlier, almost no attention to what's going on in Obiang's country, and also to the degree that the President Bush administration has embraced this government. Your sense and your response to that?
Well, a couple of things. There's an interesting nexus between Zimbabwe and Equatorial Guinea in this recent Mann affair, in as much as he was more or less kidnapped. They use the word extradition from Harare to Malabo. And, of course, there was a sort of an agreement there, obviously, and it wasn't done in the normal sense. As a matter of fact, the lawyer that the Mann family had chosen to defend Mann in Equatorial Guinea, someone named Ponciano Mbomio, received some death threats and actually was denied permission to exercise his profession in Guinea, so he can't represent him. And he's now desaparecido. He's disappeared, and nobody seems to know where he is. In any event, I think what Ken said, and you're lucky to have Ken because he's so knowledgeable in this area, what Ken said is right, that the tradition there in Zimbabwe, since the time he was using his Mugabe was using his ninjas going back 15, 20 years to carry out his will in Zimbabwe is something that's well known, and his abuses are well known, and he doesn't have much justification. A person who's probably not very popular with your audiences, the recently deceased Senator Jesse Helms, more or less predicted exactly what was going to happen with Mugabe in Zimbabwe, and unfortunately what he said has come to pass. In the case of Equatorial Guinea, the United States has acted shamefully. We have basically, for reasons of realpolitik, treated a dictator, a killer, a thief, with the greatest respect. Condoleezza Rice recognized him as such when she received him at the State Department as a great friend of the United States. And that, as an American citizen, as just a human being, disgusts me. He's not the kind of person that should receive any honors from the United States. He's a killer. He's a murderer. He's a torturer. And he's a thief.
Do you, Ambassador Ruddy, have the ear of George W. Bush?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Do you have the ear of George W. Bush or Condoleezza Rice as a former ambassador under the Republican President Ronald Reagan?
No, I don't. As a matter of fact, we're conservative, which is something that George Bush is not. So no, we're not terribly welcome over in this White House, and that's too bad because. But it's not something he doesn't know. Bush is not a stupid man. I mean, he's aware of what's happening, and this is a decision they've made. They decided that the oil is worth it, so they're going to cast a blind eye to what's going on over there in Equatorial Guinea for the results. It's realpolitik. It's gone on for as long as there's been diplomacy and relations between states. It's disgusting and it's sad, but it is realpolitik. That's what the word means.
And Ken Silverstein, can you talk to us about the role of Charlie Black, a chief advisor to John McCain, in terms of his role in Equatorial Guinea?
Well, his firm had the account for Equatorial Guinea. I confess I don't recall what Charlie Black's own role was. I remember that there was a woman named Reva Levinson who did a lot of work on behalf of Equatorial Guinea. And she was affiliated with that firm, but I think the client actually at the time was an oil company called Trident, which was subsequently bought up, but which had a big stake in Equatorial Guinea. So she was lobbying for the oil companies there, and then Reva Levinson went on to lobby for Ahmed Chalabi, as it turned out, and the Iraqi National Congress. But Charlie Black's firm, Black Manafort, it's had various names over the years, but it has always represented some of the world's worst dictators. It represented Mobutu in Zaire, Marcos in the Philippines, Jonas Savimbi in Angola, and it did represent at one point directly Equatorial Guinea as well. There was a piece in Spy magazine many, many years ago in the 1980s which was called Voices of the Damned, and it was about sort of the most unethical foreign lobbyist, and Charlie Black's firm was rated the worst of the worst. I mean, it had, Spy magazine used this sort of bloody hand ranking, and I think Charlie Black's firm had 4 bloody hand ranking, which was the highest of any of the firms. And that included, he outdid someone like Edward von Kloberg, who had represented Saddam Hussein and Ceausescu and Romania and a number of other really horrible regimes. So the fact that Black Manafort still took the prize really says something.
And his company's name?
Well, it's now called Black Manafort, I think. It's changed over the years. It was Black Manafort, Stone and Kelly. There have been partners coming in and partners going out. But, and I think Charlie Black technically has, disassociated himself from the firm technically during the campaign. I'm sorry, I lose track of, the various firms because actually it's Davis Manafort. It's Rick, now it's Davis Manafort. I guess that's because Charlie Black is gone. It's very hard to keep track. There have been 4 or 5 different names of this firm because the partners change all the time. And then when they go to work, as these are very, very powerful men, very powerful within the Republican Party, the various lobbyists who've worked at Black's firms, when they go to work for a campaign, they take a leave of absence, and then they go off and work for a campaign. So I think Charlie Black is actually on leave at this point.
From BKSH.
Okay, right. Black, Kelly, Scruggs, and Healy, I think is, yeah. Right. Sorry about that. Davis, I get mixed up because there are so many lobbyists around McCain. It's hard to keep track. Davis Manafort, these guys used to work with Charlie Black, I think, but now they have their own firm. Rick Davis was the campaign manager, and Paul Manafort, I don't believe has a direct role, but very close to John McCain. Yeah, I mean, there are there are lots of firms and dozens of lobbyists who are surrounding McCain and who have very high roles in his campaign.
I just wanted to go for a minute, as we talk about Charlie Black's past in lobbying, to play a clip of John McCain being interviewed in June by Chris Wallace on Fox News.
Let me ask you one last question. David Axelrod said you talk in the speech today about changing the way Washington does business, but your campaign is run by 2 of the biggest lobbyists in Washington. How do you respond to that?
Look, they are not lobbyists, but the fact is Americans care about my vision and plan of action for the future, that I can unite the country, that I can take on the challenges that are facing them now, which are enormous, and that's what elections are going to be about.
Ken Silverstein, your response.
Well, I mean, it's fairly ridiculous. I mean, these guys are lobbyists. They're still very plugged in. I mean, Charlie Black was caught making phone calls from McCain's bus on behalf of clients before he took this formal leave. I mean, it would be as if I took a 6-month leave to explore my life stream of becoming a painter and was planning on coming back and started saying I was a painter as opposed to a journalist. I mean, these guys are two of the most important lobbyists in town. The distinction they're making is ridiculous. You know, they're working for the campaign. And if the campaign wins, they're going to be much, much more effective lobbyists, and they will return to lobbying. And if the campaign loses, they'll still be important lobbyists in town. They just won't have the same access they might because Obama would be president as opposed to their guy McCain. So it's